Bob?
Yeah. We have, as I understand, Mr. City Manager, we have no city policy on TIF.
It's my understanding that we don't have a city policy on TIF, and I don't believe outside of grants or something have we shared TIF in the past.
We've never shared TIF. Will anybody else get TIF'd?
Well, those are policy discussions that you need to have. In my mind, you've got three significant tools in the redevelopment box. You've got construction of public improvements, which we're doing as part of Riverwalk. You've got potentially sharing TIF, and then you've got infrastructure. Those are really your three significant. You got other things, but those are really it. I mean, we're looking here as a property swap, but that's really unique because we have property that they want, and they may have property we want. But every project, in having gone through this in Fort Lauderdale as well as in Destin, every project kind of stands on its own merit depending on the challenges it will take to redevelop it. In some cases, all you have to do is public improvements. In some cases, you've got to do public improvements as well as TIF. And in some cases, you've got to do that plus the infrastructure. It depends on the challenge. So I don't think one size fits all. In Fort Lauderdale, on the new river with the Riverwalk we built, that's all we had to do to incentivize a developer to come in. As we worked our way north to the areas that had really deteriorated, we had to bring every tool in the toolbox to make it work because the developers just would not come. They just wouldn't come. There was too many economic challenges. So, but that's, I think, is a policy issue that you need to discuss because this will be probably the first time you've used it, but it's not the inappropriate use of TIF. As I think Parker said, you know, they talk about Daytona Beach, you talk about the Hard Rock, and you look into those agreements, and buried in those agreements is infrastructure. And so they're providing incentives. They may not be publicizing the incentives they're using, but they are using incentives to get those developers and property owners to come to the table.
Yeah, my concern is how do I pick and choose who gets TIF'd and who doesn't? It would seem to me that before we decide on TIF'd on this project, we should have a standard to apply TIF'd against. Now remember, this is the most beautiful property and the most attractive property in this whole area along Ridgewood. So if we have to do TIF to get this moving, then clearly we ought to consider what we're going to do with the rest of it and begin to talk about TIF in that context. I also, as an egalitarian, always am cautious about giving to one what I don't give to everyone. It's a very hard legal and philosophical and ethical question. Who do you give it to and who you don't? Because it opens you up to all sorts of charges of cronyism, etc. So I would like to see, as part of this discussion, a clear analysis of when TIF is given, to whom it's given, and what's that judgment based on. What are the universal standards that can be applied to all properties in the CRA for the distribution of TIF? I really don't feel good about giving it to one without saying I'm not willing to follow principle to give it to anyone else that meets reasonable criteria. And what it senses to me, if we're going to need this, the premier piece of property in Riverwalk, and by the way, we're in the process of doing dramatic assistance to this property in that we're investing nearly $3 million in the land surrounding this, and ultimately $5 to $7 million in the lands around this, that is going to put this piece of property in the most valued position. This piece of property is going to be worth a heck of a lot of money and is going to attract major interest because of the significant public improvements around it. So to say that we're not assisting without TIF is not true. We have a major investment, and by the way, I might add, our investment is without the assistance of TIF. We are using general fund dollars and dollars that that our taxpayers are going to be paying directly back because part of it's from the financing of loans. So we have to take all this into the equation because this is critical. And the final part of the TIF concern is we have a couple of outstanding debts from this project. We have the money we borrowed to buy the properties. We also have the money we borrowed from the general fund to pay the loans back. And that's still out there, I believe, what, about $1.5 million?
$4.5 million.
And then we're also buying properties in the CRA with general fund tax monies that should have been bought with CRA monies, but our CRA is upside down. So my other concern that we need to address in our discussion is what are the implications of giving half of our TIF? Is it going to make, we need to get this CRA off the back of the taxpayers, because if we're going to give our employees pay raises, if we're going to hire sufficient police and firemen, this all comes out of the general fund. The monies that we spend, that we give away here, are going to have direct implications. And if we can begin to pay back with the TIF money some of the things. So I'd like a good analysis. The final comment I have is a comment I've made before. Margaret, do you have all the legal paperwork necessary to know who we're dealing with and who we're agreeing with, and background on the corporate entities and everything?
I have the corporate records that are filed with the Secretary of State for the state of Florida. With regard to financial background, that is not something that I have reviewed nor have I requested. I think financial information should be reviewed by those with financial expertise, and that would not be me.
City Manager, is it your intention, or is it council's intention, that before we enter into a deal with anyone, that we have a clear idea of who financially we're dealing with and their wherewithals to bring a project of this nature forward? Because I certainly don't want to get involved, as is so often the case in these, and end up with a project that goes nowhere, further slowing down the process. And by the way, with the large amount of money we're investing in the park areas around this, that investment could be nullified or reduced in impact if this project doesn't move forward properly. So do we have plans to do that? And that surely, I'm not going to vote for any type of sharing until I have a good sense of who we're sharing it with.
I think what you're asking is you want assurances that the folks that we're dealing with can in fact deliver on that.
I think that's at a minimum, yeah. How could anyone not ask for that?
No. And we would need to bring you that back. We don't have it now, but we can bring that back.
Well, how can next week, in 2 weeks, or what, a week or two we're talking about?
Yeah, I see this as more incrementally us getting comfort levels. And if we bring certain information back to you on June the 3rd, and then we need to bring additional information to get a comfort level, we can do that.
Margaret, at what point does council decisions affect our legal status? And what I mean by that is if we make votes, at what point do they put us at legal risk of being sued for contractual or semi-contractual things?
Well, for instance, tonight you've been asked to make a decision based upon the first sheet of deal points, I'll call them. I would suggest to you, rather than voting, that you continue your discussion, formalize an agreement, review it, discuss it, and then perhaps consider voting. I would not suggest you vote on anything tonight. You haven't had a chance to review it and even sleep on it. I always sleep on it one night.
Well, I think, taking you in the past, the only thing that you've done to date as relates to this is a conceptual, that's it. And so, and I don't disagree with Margaret. I mean, I don't, you've seen it for the first time at 5:15. You need to digest it. We need to answer the questions that you've asked us to answer. And when you're comfortable, I think what I'm hearing him say, once we get comfortable with the terms of agreement, then we would memorialize that into a document, and you would see it again, you dot the I's, cross the T's, and then start voting on something.
And my final comment in this round is the issue, is this what our image and vision is for Port Orange? A series of high rises along the river. Remember, this is going to be called a wall. It's going to be Port Orange's wall as opposed to South Daytona's wall. But it's going to look like a wall from the road as people come down. Is Port Orange, and I think you may well be at ease with us moving into a whole new area of high-rise development. Is that what is part of our vision, that the city should be moving in the direction of subsidy? And remember, we're assisting in this through subsidy. Do we want to be moving in that direction? Is that our vision, that a sizable part of our waterfront would be occupied by tall 17-story buildings?